The night Iris Hale knocked on Cole Maddox's door and asked if she could sleep there, neither of them knew that within the space of a single rainstorm, the two carefully sealed-off lives they had each decided to live alone would find a door between them that neither would ever fully close again. Cole was 41, and he repaired boats and docks for a living on the quiet side of a lake that emptied out almost entirely once the summer people went home. He had built his days the way he built a hull, plank by plank, with nothing extra. He had been a widower for 6 years. He did not say the word out loud and rarely said it even to himself, because the word made people tilt their heads, and he had grown to dislike the tilt more than the grief. His wife had died in a way that was nobody's fault, which was somehow the hardest kind, and afterward Cole had done the only thing he trusted, which was work. And after enough years of work, the lake house had gone very quiet, and he had told himself the quiet was peace. He was not bitter. He was just a man who had stopped expecting the door to knock for him and had made an arrangement with that fact and considered the arrangement settled. That night the storm had come in hard off the water, the kind that turned the back roads to running silver and knocked the power out for half the county, and Cole was sitting by an oil lamp because the grid was down, sanding the wing of a small wooden bird he carved sometimes with his hands when his head wouldn't quiet, listening to the rain hammer the porch roof and the wind drag at the eaves, when headlights swept across his front windows, slewed, and died. He heard a car door. He heard nothing for a long moment. And then came the knock, not the confident knock of someone who belongs somewhere, but the small, drowned, half-defeated knock of someone who has run out of better options. When he opened the door, the woman on the porch was soaked to the bone in a coat 2 sizes too big, holding a phone with a dead black screen, and her face had the specific composure of a person working very hard not to fall apart in front of a stranger. She was maybe 36. Her hair was plastered dark to her cheek, and there was rain or something like it tracking down her face, and she was shivering in a way she was clearly trying to hide. "My car died about a mile back," she said, and her voice was steady right up until the last word where it wasn't. "I've been walking. Yours is the only porch light for a long way. My phone's dead. I'm not going to pretend I'm not asking for something I have no right to ask a stranger." She swallowed. "Can I sleep here tonight? On the porch even. I can't get back in that car. I can't be out here." "Please." Cole looked at her, and at the dark road behind her where her headlights had died, and at the storm that wasn't going to let up before morning, and he did not think very long. Because some things a decent man simply does. "You'll catch your death on the porch," he said, and stepped back to let her in. "There's a fire. Come get warm." Her name was Iris Hale. He got that much out of her once she was wrapped in one of his flannel shirts and a wool blanket with a mug of tea going cold in her hands by the fire he built up in the wood stove, and not much more, because she was the kind of careful that Cole recognized in his own reflection. He gave her the bedroom without making it a discussion. He simply carried fresh sheets up the stairs and said the bed was hers and the door had a lock and he'd be on the couch by the stove if the storm got loud, and the way she looked at him when he said the part about the lock told him something about where she'd been that she had not said out loud. He carved the rest of the night away by the lamp while the rain came down, and upstairs eventually. The floor stopped creaking, and a person who had clearly not slept properly in a long while finally slept. In the morning the storm had blown through and the lake lay flat and silver under a low pearl sky, and Cole was making coffee on the camp stove because the power was still out when Iris came down the stairs in his too big flannel, looking like she'd half expected to wake up and find the kindness had a price tag she hadn't seen yet. He poured her a cup and slid it across the counter and did not ask her anything, and that, more than the bed or the fire, seemed to undo something in her shoulders. "You're not going to ask," she said. "Not unless you want me to," Cole said. "I'll drive you to your car after this. If it's the alternator like it sounds, I can get the part from town. But the marina's the only thing open and the road parts shop won't have it till tomorrow. You're welcome to the bed till then. No price. I can see you waiting for the price. There isn't one." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "People always say that," she said quietly. "And then there's a price." "Then they weren't telling the truth," Cole said. "I'm not selling anything. I fix boats. I had a spare bed doing nothing. That's the whole transaction." She drank her coffee and looked out at the flat lake, and something in her face loosened by a careful degree, and over the next few days, while the part was ordered and the part was delayed, Cole learned the shape of her the way the lake learns the shape of a stone dropped into it, slowly, in spreading rings. She was sharp underneath the exhaustion. She had a dry, watchful humor that came out in flashes when she forgot to guard it. When he made her toast, she said the bread was so old it had opinions. That first full evening he cooked, because there was nothing else to do with the power still flickering and the marina closed, and he was not a fancy cook, but he could make a pot of something honest. And the kitchen filled with the smell of onions and bay and wood smoke from the stove, while rain came and went against the dark windows. Iris sat at the counter with a glass of water and watched him the way a person watches a thing they're afraid to trust. And at some point she said, quietly, "You don't have to keep being this nice. I'd actually relax more if you'd be a little bit selfish. At least then I'd know the rules." Cole stirred the pot. "There aren't any rules," he said. "I know that's the hard part. The people who run on rules are usually the ones counting what you owe." She turned the glass in her hands. "He never yelled," she said, "apropos of nothing and everything. I want you to understand that. People hear I left and they picture something loud. It was never loud. It was a man being so reasonable about everything I did wrong that I started apologizing before I even knew what for. I got so good at being small I could do it in my sleep." She looked up. "And then I drove a mile in a storm to a stranger's porch, and you gave me the bed and pointed out the lock, and I lay up there thinking, this man owes me nothing, and he gave me a door I could close. Do you know how long it had been since I had a door I could close?" Cole set 2 bowls down and sat across from her, and he did not reach for her, and he did not fill the silence with comfort she hadn't asked for. He just said, "You can close every door in this house. You can close them on me. The offer doesn't expire and it doesn't come due." She ate slowly, and somewhere in the middle of the bowl her shoulders came down from around her ears, the way they had that morning, only further this time, and she said, "It's good. Don't tell the diner. I have a reputation to protect with that meatloaf." And Cole almost smiled, and outside the rain picked up again, and the night closed in warm around the 2 of them and the lamp. And for the first time in a very long time the quiet in the lake house did not feel like a thing he was guarding. It felt like a thing he was sharing. When he showed her the carved bird he'd been working the night she arrived, she turned it over in her fingers a long time and said, "You make things with your hands so your head has somewhere to go that isn't out loud." And Cole had to look away at the lake for a second, because no one had ever said the true thing about him so easily. The part for her car was delayed a day, and then another, and Cole drove her into town anyway because she was going quietly stir-crazy in a house that wasn't hers, and they ended up in the one diner that stayed open past the summer. A low place with mismatched chairs and a hand-lettered sign warning that the salsa was hotter than it looked. They took a booth by the window where the afternoon light came in flat and gold off the wet street, and Iris read the menu out loud in a hushed voice because the diner had described its meatloaf with 4 adjectives, and she felt someone ought to acknowledge the effort. Cole, who had not laughed out loud in a public place in longer than he wanted to count, did, and a woman 2 booths over glanced up, and Iris looked delighted with herself. For a while it was easy in a way that startled both of them. Then a man at the counter said something too loud to a waitress half his age, a small cruelty dressed up as a joke. The kind men like that always think buys them the room, and the waitress's face went tight and polite, and Iris went very still. Cole watched her watch it, watched the old reflex move across her face, the bracing, the certainty that nobody would say anything because nobody ever did. So Cole said something. Not loud. He never went loud. He just turned slightly toward the counter and said, evenly, "You'll have to say it again. We couldn't hear the funny part from over here." The man at the counter looked at him, took the measure of him, the size of his hands and the flatness of his voice, and decided his coffee was suddenly very interesting, and the waitress shot Cole a look of pure, quiet gratitude and refilled their water without being asked. Iris stared at him across the booth. "You just did that. Like it was nothing." "It was nothing," Cole said. "Someone being smaller than they have to be. Easy to name out loud once you stop being afraid of the silence after." She turned her water glass in a slow circle on the table, and her voice when it came was lower. "That's the thing nobody warns you about. she said. The hardest part of being made small by someone isn't the being made small. It's that everybody around you stays quiet, and then expects you to be grateful when it finally stops. Curtis made me small so gently that for 3 years I thanked him for it. She looked up. I forgot there were people who'd just say the thing, without keeping a receipt. No receipts, Cole said. I lost the habit of keeping score around the time I lost the person I'd have kept it for. Turns out life's lighter without the ledger. He pushed the salsa toward her. Try this. The sign's not lying. She tried it, and her eyes watered, and she called the diner a liar through the heat, and he laughed again, and for the length of one gold afternoon in a town she'd stumbled into by accident, Iris Hale forgot to brace for the bill. They drove back to the lake with the windows cracked, and as they turned up the long gravel drive, her phone, charging on the dash for the first time in days, lit up and buzzed with a string of messages she did not open, and she turned it face down on the seat without a word, and the easy gold of the afternoon went quiet, and Cole understood the relentless, reasonable voice had found a signal again. He learned the harder shape of her over those days, too. He learned she startled at the sound of a car on the road and didn't relax until it passed. He learned she'd been driving for 2 days with no real destination, just away, and that away was not from a place, but from a person. And on the second evening, sitting on the dock in the long gold light with their feet hanging over the water, she told him, in the flat, careful voice of someone reciting a thing she'd decided not to feel, about Curtis. Curtis was her fiancé. Curtis was reasonable. Curtis had never once raised his hand or his voice, and that, she said, was the part nobody believed, because Curtis didn't need to. Curtis kept a quiet account of everything she did wrong and read it back to her gently, in private, so patiently that for 3 years she had believed the problem was her. Curtis tracked where she was, for her safety. Curtis told her friends kindly that she was fragile, so that when she finally said something was wrong, the ground had already been prepared to call her the unstable one. She had left in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday with a duffel bag and the clothes she had on. And she had been driving ever since, and she had told no one where she was, and that was why the dead phone in her hand the night she knocked had felt less like a problem and more like the first clean breath she'd taken in years. "He'll find me eventually," she said to the lake. "He always does. He's not loud, he's just relentless in a reasonable voice. And then he makes it so I'm the one who has to explain myself." She drew her knees up. "I don't know why I'm telling you this. You fix boats. You owe me nothing and I'm handing you my whole." She stopped. "I'm sorry. I do this. I overstay." "You're not overstaying," Cole said, "and you don't have to be sorry for the size of the thing you're carrying." She looked at him then, and the gold light was on the water, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and then a car turned off the main road onto the long gravel drive, and Iris went absolutely white, and Cole knew before he even saw it that the reasonable voice had arrived. Curtis Wynne got out of a clean sedan in clean clothes and stood in the gravel with his hands open and empty in a gesture of peace, and he said, "Iris, thank God. I have been out of my mind." His voice was warm and even and pitched, Cole noticed, slightly to Carrie, as if he already had an audience in mind. "I tracked your phone's last ping before it died. Do you have any idea what you put everyone through, just vanishing? Your sister's been crying for 2 days. He took her in, the borrowed flannel, the dock, the stranger, and something flickered under the warmth and was smoothed back over. Okay, whatever this is, it's all right. You're not well right now, and that's not your fault. Let's just get you home where people understand you before this turns into something you'll have to explain to everyone." Cole had spent 6 years getting extremely good at saying nothing. He understood now that this was a different occasion. He got to his feet unhurried and put himself not in front of Iris but beside her at the head of the dock, and he said, in the level voice he used on water that was trying to fool him, "She's not going anywhere she has to explain herself for being." Curtis turned the warm smile on him. "I'm sorry, and you are?" "The man whose porch she chose over your car," Cole said. "You drove a long way to tell a woman in front of a stranger that she's not well. Funny, from here she looks like the calmest she's been in a while." He let that sit. "You keep saying you want to take her home. She's standing on a dock she walked a mile in a storm to reach. Maybe the thing she ran from is the thing that calls itself home. The warmth on Curtis's face thinned to something colder and more honest, just for a second, and in that second Iris saw it, the whole apparatus of it, the reasonable voice over the relentless hand. And Cole watched her see it. Curtis recovered fast. Men like Curtis always recover fast, and he spread his hands again and said, "Iris, tell this man you're coming home. Tell him, and we'll forget all of this." And Iris Hale, who had spent 3 years being told in a gentle voice that her own judgment couldn't be trusted, stood up on the dock in a borrowed shirt, and did not look at Cole for permission, and said, "No, Curtis, I'm not, and I'd like you to leave the way you came. I'm being clear," she said. "For the first time in a long time. You should write it down. You're good at keeping records." For a moment Curtis stood very still in the gravel, recalculating, and then, because there was no audience after all and nothing left to perform, he got back in the clean sedan and reversed too fast down the long drive, gravel spitting, and the sound of him faded, and then there was only the lake and the evening and the small wooden bird on the dock between them, and Iris sat back down very suddenly, like her legs had been holding more than they could. She did not cry the dramatic way. She cried the other way, the quiet flooding way of relief that's been held too long, and she put the back of her hand to her mouth and she said, "I keep waiting to feel like I've done something terrible. And I don't. I just feel like I can breathe." She laughed, wet and astonished. 3 years and the thing I was most afraid of took 90 seconds and a complete stranger telling the truth. "I'm not a complete stranger anymore," Cole said. 2 days in a borrowed flannel does something. There are couples who know less." She turned to look at him, and the gold had gone to amber on the water, and she said, "Why did you do it? Stand beside me like that. You could have stayed out of it. It wasn't your fight." Cole looked at the lake for a while, the way he did when the true thing was hard to say out loud, and then he made himself say it anyway. 6 years ago I lost the person I built my whole quiet life around, and I decided the door wasn't going to knock for me again, and I made my peace with that. Or I told myself I did. He turned the carved bird over in his hands. Then it knocked. In the rain. And I found out I wasn't done after all. I just hadn't met the reason to keep going. He set the bird down between them. "I didn't stand beside you because it was my fight, Iris. I stood beside you because somewhere in the last 2 days I stopped being able to imagine standing anywhere else." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up the carved bird and held it and said, very low, "I don't know how to want something without bracing for the bill." "Then we'll go slow," Cole said. "I'm a man who repairs things plank by plank. I'm in no hurry. And there's no bill." He met her eyes. "But I'm not going to pretend I don't want you to stay long enough to find that out." And Iris Hale, who had walked a mile through a storm away from a reasonable voice and toward the only porch light for miles, leaned across the small space on the dock and rested her forehead against his, the way you lean against something you've finally decided will hold, and said, "Then I'll stay long enough," and after a moment, with the lake gone dark and the first stars out, she closed the rest of the space, and Cole, who had been so sure the wanting part of him was buried, found out he had only set it down for a while. Curtis tried twice more, the way relentless men do, once with a long, reasonable email forwarded to her sister and once with a lawyer's letter that turned out to have no teeth, and both times Iris answered for herself in her own clear voice. And both times she did not ask Cole to fight it for her, and both times he stood beside her and not in front of her, because he had learned that the strongest thing he could do was let her be the one to close the door. Her sister came up to the lake that fall, braced for a crisis, and found Iris pruning a garden she had started by the dock, laughing at something, and went home quiet and changed. Curtis's reasonable voice ran out of road eventually, the way all of them do when there's no one left agreeing to be reasonable back. They married in the second spring, on the dock, in the early evening, with the lake gone gold the way it had been the night she told him the truth, with maybe 30 folding chairs and a fire pit and string lights Cole strung along the railing himself. And Iris carried no flowers but held, in the pocket of her dress, the small wooden bird from the night she'd arrived, which Cole had finished and oiled and given her on the morning the power finally came back. He had carved a tiny second bird beside it on the same branch since, without saying anything, the way he made things with his hands so his head had somewhere to go that wasn't out loud. And she had found it and said nothing either, and that was its own kind of vow. The first months were made of small ordinary things which Cole had learned were the only things that ever really hold. She painted the spare room a color she picked herself just because no one could tell her not to, and stood in the doorway looking at it for a long time afterward like she'd gotten away with something. She learned the names of his repair customers and which ones brought their dogs. On the calm evenings they took the small boat out and drifted with the motor off, and one night, out on the flat dark water with the stars coming up, she said, "I keep waiting for the catch," and Cole said, "There isn't one, but I'll keep saying so until you believe me, as long as it takes," and she put her head on his shoulder and they let the boat drift back to the dock on its own slow time. She started a garden by the water and a small stack of seed catalogs by the bed, and made plans out loud in the open the way a person does when no one is keeping score of them anymore. Years on an ordinary autumn night with the wood stove going and rain ticking the porch roof, Cole would come in from the dock and find Iris asleep on the couch with a book on her chest and the lamp low, no longer the woman who startled at cars on the road. And he would stand in the doorway a moment the way he had stood in it the night she knocked. And he would understand, the way you understand a thing in your hands, that the door he'd sealed off 6 years ago had not been the end of anything. It had just been waiting for the right knock, and it had come in the rain, asking only to sleep there, and it had stayed, and it had changed everything. What would you have done if a stranger knocked on your door in a storm and asked if they could sleep there for the night? And have you ever stood beside someone while they found their own voice for the first time, or had someone stand beside you when you finally found yours? Tell me your story in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.